hear the thundering blows and the sound of his lover screaming. Adrian sounded like a rabbit in a snare, he told the police. Haggerty crawled back towards the intersection and the bright lights of the bus station, but when he was a distance away, he turned back to look. Adrian Mellon, who stood about 5'5" and might have weighed 135 pounds, soaking wet, was being pushed from Garton to Dubé to Unwin in a kind of triple pay. His body jittered and flopped like the body of a rag doll, and they were punching him, pummeling him, ripping at his clothes as they watched, he said. Garton punched Adrian in the crotch. Adrian's hair hung in his face and blood poured out of his mouth and soaked his shirt. Webby Garton wore two heavy rings on his right hand. One was their high school ring, and the other was made of shop class. Intertwined brass, DB stood out 3 inches from the latter. The 3 letters stood for the Dead Bugs, a metal band he particularly admired. The rings torn Adrian's upper lip open and shattered 3 of his upper teeth and his gum line. "Help!" Haggerty shrieked. "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help!" The buildings of Main Street loomed dark and secret. No one came to help, not even from one of the white island lights which marked the bus station. Haggerty did not see how that could be. There were people in there. He had seen them when he and Aid had walked past. Were none of them coming to help? None at all? "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help! Please, for God's sakes! Help!" A very small voice whispered from Don Haggerty's left, and then there was a giggle. "Bums rush!" Garton was yelling now yelling and laughing. All 3 of them, Haggerty told Gardner and Reeves, had been laughing while they beat Adrian up. "Bums rush over the side! Bums rush over the side! Bums rush! Bums rush! Bums rush!" Dubé chanted, laughing. "Help!" The small voice again. Although the voice was grave, the little giggle that followed again, it was like the voice of a child who cannot help himself. Haggerty looked down and saw the clown, and it was at this point that Gardner and Reeves began to discount everything that Haggerty said, because the rest of it was the raving lunatic. Later, however, Haggerty told Gardner, and Harold Gardner found himself wondering. Later, when he found that Unwin boy had also seen the clown, or said he had, he began to have second thoughts. His partner either never had them or would never admit to them. The clown, Haggerty said, looked like a cross between Ronald McDonald and that of the old TV clown Bozo, or so he thought at first. It was the wild tufts of orange hair that brought such comparisons to mind, but later consideration had caused him to think of the clown really looked like neither. The smile painted over white pancake was red, not orange, and the eyes were a wild shiny silver. Contact lenses maybe, but a part of him thought then, and continued to think, that the silver had been the real color of those eyes. He wore a baggy suit with red-orange pom-pom buttons on his hands, and on his hands were cartoon gloves. "If you need help, Don," the clown said, "help yourself to a balloon," and it offered the bunch it held in its hand. "They float," the clown said. "Down here we all float. Pretty soon your friend will float too." 12. "This clown called you by name," Jeff Reeves said in a totally expressionless voice. He looked over Haggerty's bent head and Harry Gardner, and one eye drew down a wink. "Yes," Haggerty said, not looking up. "I know how it sounds." 13. "So then you threw him over," Boutillier said. "Bums rush." "Not me," Unwin said, looking up. He flicked his hair out of his eyes with one hand and stared at them urgently. "When I saw they really meant to do it, I tried to pull Steve away, because I knew the guy might get banged up. It was like 10 feet to the water." It was 23, one of the chief raid managers patrolmen had already measured. "But it was like he was crazy. The 2 of them kept yelling, 'Bums rush, bums rush,' and they picked him up. Webby held him under the arms, and Steve had him by the rear of his pants, and 14. When Haggerty saw what they were doing, he had rushed back towards them, screaming, 'No, no, no,' at the top of his lungs. Chris Unwin pushed him back, and Haggerty landed on the teeth-rattling heap on the sidewalk. 'You want to go over too?' he whispered. 'You run, baby.' They threw Adrian Mellon over the bridge and into the water then, and Haggerty heard the splash. 'Let's get out of here,' Steve Dubby said. He and Webby were backing toward the car. Chris Unwin went to the railing and looked over. He saw Haggerty first, sliding and clawing his way down the weedy trash littered embankment of the water. Then he saw the clown. The clown was dragging Adrian out to the far side with one arm. The balloons were in its other hand, and Adrian was dripping wet, choking, moaning. The clown twisted his head and grinned up at Chris. Chris said he saw its shining silver eyes as it bared its teeth. Great big teeth, he said. Like the lion in the circus, I mean. They were that big, he said. Then he said he saw the clown shove one of Adrian Mellon's arms back so it lay over his head. Then what, Chris? Battier said. He was bored with this part. Fairy tales had bored him since the age of 8 on. I don't know, Chris said. That was when Steve grabbed me and he hauled me into the car. But I think it bit into its armpit. He looked at them, uncertain now. I know that's what it did. Bit into his armpit. Like he wanted to eat him. Like he wanted to eat his heart. No, 15. No, Haggerty said when he presented with Chris Unwin's story in the form of questions. The clown did not drag Aid up on the far bank, at least not as he saw. He would grant that he had been something less than disinterested in the observer by this point. By this point he had been out of his fucking mind. The clown had said he was the clown, he said, was standing on the far bank with Adrian's dripping body clutched in his arm. Its right arm was stuck stiffly out behind the clown's head, and the clown's face was indeed in Aid's right armpit. But it was not biting, it was smiling. Haggerty could see it looking out from beneath Aid's arm, smiling. The clown's arm tightened, and Haggerty heard his rib splinter. Aid shrieked. Float with us, Don, the clown said out of its grinning red mouth, and then pointed with one of the white gloves under the bridge. Balloons floated against the underside of the bridge, not a dozen or dozens, or a dozen dozens, but thousands. Red and blue and green and yellow, and painted on the side of each was I Heart Dairy. 16. Well, now that surely does sound like a lot of balloons, Reeves said, and tipped Harold Gardner with another wink. I know how it sounds, Haggerty reiterated in the same dreary voice. You saw those balloons, Gardner said. Don Haggerty slowly held his hands in front of his face. I saw them as clearly as I can see my own fingers at this moment. Thousands of them. You couldn't even see the underside of the bridge. There were too many of them, and they were rippling a little, this sort of bouncing up and down. They were the stupid, a funny low squealing noise. That was their sides running together, and the strings, there was a forest of white strings hanging down, and they looked like white strands of spiderweb. The clown took Aid under there, and I could see the soup brushing through those strings, and Aid was making awful choking sounds. I started after him, and the clown looked back, and I saw its eyes, and all at once I understood who it was. And who was it, Don? Harold Gardner asked softly. It was Derry, Don Haggerty said. It was this town. And what did you do then? It was Reeves. I ran, you dumb shit, Haggerty said, and burst into tears. 17. Harold Gardner kept his peace until November 13th, the day before John Garton and Steve Dibby were on trial in Derry District Court for the murder of Adrian Mellon. Then he went to see Don Battier. He didn't want to talk about the clown. Battier didn't. But when he saw Gardner, and might do something stupid without a little guidance, he did. There was no clown, Harold. The only clowns that night were the only clowns out that night were those 3 kids. You know what that as well as I do. We have 2 witnesses. Oh, that's crap. Unwin decided to bring it on the one-armed man, as in, we didn't kill the poor little faggot. It was the one-armed man. As soon as he understood he'd really gotten his buns on some hot water this time, Haggerty was hysterical. He stood by and watched those kids murder his best friends. It wouldn't have surprised me if he'd seen flying saucers. But Battier knew better. Gardner could see it in his eyes. His assistant DA ducking and dodging irritated him. Come on, he said. We're talking about independent witnesses here. Don't bullshit me. Oh, you want to talk about bullshit? Are you telling me you believe there's a vampire clown under the Main Street Bridge? Because that's my idea of bullshit. Well, no, not exactly, but or that Haggerty saw a billion balloons under there, each imprinted with exactly the same thing, and what was written on his lover's hat, because that's also my idea of bullshit. No, but then why are you bothering with this? Stop cross-examining me. Gardner roared. They both described the same, and neither of them knew what the other was saying. Battier had been sitting at the desk playing with the pencil. Now, put the pencil down, got up, and walked over to Harold Gardner. Battier was 5 inches shorter, but Harold retreated a step before the man's anger. Do you want us to lose this case, Harold? No, of course not. Do you want those running sores to walk free? No. Okay, good. Since we both agree on the basics, I'll tell you exactly what I think. Yes, there was probably a man under that bridge that night. Maybe he was even wearing a clown suit, although I've dealt with enough witnesses to guess that it was maybe a stubum or a transient wearing a bunch of cast-off clothes. I think he was probably down there scrounging for dropped change or road meat or half of a burger or something chucked under the side, or maybe crumbs from the bottom of the Frito bag. Their eyes did Their eyes did the rest, Harold. Now, is that possible? I don't know, Harold said. He wanted to be convinced, but he knew exactly what the two descriptions. No, he didn't think it was possible. Here's the bottom line. I don't care if it was Kingo the Clown, or a guy in an Uncle Sam suit on stilts, or Hubert the Happy Homo. If we introduce this fellow into the case, their lawyer is going to be on it before you can say Jack Robinson. He's going to say those two little innocent lambs out there with their fresh haircuts and new suits didn't do anything but toss that gay fellow Melon over the side of the bridge for a joke. He'll point out that Melon was still alive after he took the fall. They have Haggerty's testimony as well as Unwin's for that. His clients didn't commit the murder. Oh no, it was the psycho in the clown suit. If we introduce this, that's going to happen, and you know it. Unwin's going to tell that story anyhow. But Haggerty isn't, Boteria said, because he understands. Without Haggerty, who's going to believe Onion? Well, there's us, Harold Gardner said with a bitterness that surprised even himself.